Hello and welcome back to Simon's Rants and to the end of another great year. I'm Simon and today I'm going to be counting down the top 10 best movies of the year 2022, which for a year where supposedly they don't make any good movies anymore, we had quite a few. Before I do jump into the list, I want to say what I have to say every year, which is I didn't see every movie to come out this year. I'm sorry, I just didn't get to. I was especially busy this year trying to make my own movie. And also, I say this every year too, but this is my personal subjective list. Art is not objective. It is subjective. People are going to have different opinions, and that's a good thing. So, no, we're not going to agree. This is just my list on the movies I enjoyed the most this year. And lastly, I'm going to give a shout out to, it didn't make it on my list, but I did really enjoy it, Look Both Ways. It was a surprisingly good movie. I didn't expect to like it. I had no intention of watching it, and then a friend told me to watch it, and I was like, hey, this was actually really good, and everybody I've told to watch it has had the exact same reaction where they're like, really? You're really telling me to watch this movie? It looks like a Hallmark movie. I'm like, just trust me and watch it. And they've all come back and said, yeah, that was actually really good. So it wasn't quite good enough to make it onto my list. It was actually the last one to get knocked off my list because I was holding out hope for it, but it didn't make it. But still worth a watch, so if you haven't seen it, you should probably check that out. But that's enough for me. Let's get on with this list. Number 10, Weird, the Al Yankovic Story. This movie's pretty dumb, and that's why it's great. I enjoyed this movie so much because of how ridiculous and how weird and how absolutely strange it was. It checked off all the boxes of everything I was hoping it would be, and then some. It was absolutely strange and marvelous and wonderful, and really encapsulated everything that Weird Al is into this awesome little movie. Number 9. The Fable Men. I said this in my review, but I haven't been the biggest fan of Spielberg of late. He hasn't really made anything that I cared all that much about in over a decade. And the last movie I watched by him that I was like, wow, that was good, was War Horse. I don't know. Something's been missing from his movies lately, but whatever it was, he found it again in this movie. It was like he recaptured that glimmer of hope, that inspiration, that little sparkle in his eye that's been missing for a few years, and put it all into this movie. It's such an amazing little movie that is based on something so profoundly personal that you would think nobody else would possibly be able to relate to it, yet I related to almost everything that happened in this movie in some way or another. It was so well made and such a good movie. Once again, if you haven't seen it, please check it out. Number 8. Babylon. It's hard to put into words exactly how I feel about this movie because days later I'm still processing it, but that's the amazing thing about this kind of art is that I'm still chewing on it. I'm still working through it. You don't really know how to feel about it, but you feel curious and you want to keep watching it. You want to see what the hell it just was. And Damien Chazelle really told a powerful story through this imagery, whether it was shocking, whether it was satisfying, whether it was demented, or whether it was cute. It was all of these things in different ways. It had a whole array, a whole spectrum of feelings and emotions, and it was a bit overwhelming, I'll admit, but the end result was something unlike anything I've seen before. Number 7, Nope. I gave this movie a lot of crap when it first came out. I never said it was bad, but I really just didn't understand it. But the more time I sat with it, and the more time I processed it and started to piece things together, I just fell more and more in love with this movie. There's still stuff in it that I feel like I don't fully comprehend, but that's not a demerit against it. That's on me as a viewer to try and figure it out and piece it together. Everything that I've figured out about this movie has been fascinating. I know it gets a lot of crap for not living up necessarily to Get Out, but Get Out is a fantastic movie, and just because this isn't as good as that doesn't mean it's a bad movie. It's still really good and definitely worth a spot on this list. Number 6. The Banshees of Inisherin. The acting in this movie is absolutely phenomenal from Brendan Gleeson and Colin Farrell. The script is snappy, the humor is all over the place, and even though the movie makes absolutely no sense if you're trying to take it literally, once you understand that it's actually an allegory for something much bigger, then things start to fall back into place and make a little more sense. I didn't understand this movie when I first watched it, but I was so desperate to like it based on everything. Like, the humor is so good, the acting is so good, the cinematography is so good. I was like, I have to love this movie. There has to be something more to this movie that I'm missing that will make this make sense. And after doing a little bit of research, I decided, yeah, there was something I was missing, and now the pieces fit, and this movie's actually really good. Thankfully, because if it wasn't, it was a waste of a lot of really good writing. Number 5. Smile. Ooh boy, I love allegorical horror. I say that every year. Last year's top 10 was absolutely dominated by allegorical horror. Unfortunately, many of the horror movies I was looking forward to this year absolutely fell flat for me. This was, I think, the only one that really lived up to any sort of hype I'd had for it, and I didn't really have much hype for it outside of the ads for it. The ads were so good, I was like, well, I have to go see it, and it lived up to it. I've heard people complain that the ending is a little bit of a letdown, and I get that, I do, but just the build-up and the suspense and the allegory and the meaning behind what they're saying with this movie was so expertly done. It's got like the best jump scares I've possibly ever seen. Like, jump scares are so synonymous at this point with bad horror that when you actually use them as praise, it sounds weird. But when you do jump scares right, it is some of the best horror you can do, and this movie absolutely does it. And then you take that and add in the chilling imagery of the creepy smiles, which was just so well done, with the dialogue and the pacing and just everything about how this movie felt was so good. I was checking over my shoulder that entire night. Horror doesn't do that to me, but this movie did. And so, yeah, maybe the ending was the weakest part of this movie. Maybe it went on a little bit too long and did a couple of weird things here and there. I don't care. It was good enough that I loved it anyway. Number 4, Bodies, Bodies, Bodies. This was the absolute out of left field surprise shocker movie of the year for me. I had no expectations for this movie at all. I went in thinking this is either going to be haha kind of funny or the worst horror movie ever made. And instead of either of those, it turned out to be one of the best satires I've seen in decades. People don't really seem to make great satire all that often anymore, but this movie was hilarious and so well executed. Yes, it looks like a horror and it feels like a horror, but it in fact is actually a satire comedy about Gen Z culture, and it is so well done, so well written, and so well acted, surprisingly well acted by these random actors that I had never heard of before. I went in only knowing who Pete Davidson was, and frankly, the rest of the cast all stole the show away from him. He was hilarious, he really was, but the whole cast is so good you kind of don't even really think about him that much. Like I said, this was the surprise of the year for me. I did not expect this to be good, it was not really on my radar, and I almost didn't go to the showing. I have a list, with AMC, so I get free tickets whenever, so I had already gotten a ticket for it, but was kind of feeling lazy, and I was like, you know what, I'm probably not actually gonna go. And I was laying on my couch when I was like, you know what, fine, screw it, alright, I've got nothing better to do, I'm just being lazy, I'll go, alright, I'll go. And I went, and it ended up being like the best decision of the year for me. It was such a good movie. I enjoyed it so much. So please just watch it if you haven't, because it got crapped on. A lot of people were disappointed that this wasn't a horror movie. I'm sorry, that's just not what it was. It was a satire, and it was great. Number 3, Bardo. False Chronicle of a Handful of Truths. So in my first thoughts of this movie, I claimed that I believe this movie to be possibly perfect, and I still stand by that, but that was only a couple of days ago when I recorded my first thoughts, because I just saw this movie a few days ago. I'm still very new to this movie. I haven't fully processed it yet, and it could end up being, to me, the best movie of this year, but the other movies that I have ahead of it, I already know exactly how I feel about them, and I wanted to rank them where they are. This movie may grow on me and become the best movie of the year, but it's still too fresh that I don't feel like I can put it there and not be worried that my feelings toward it will change at some point. I don't think it can possibly be ranked any lower than 3rd for me, though, because this movie was absolutely amazing. So take this with a grain of salt. This could be number 1, number 2, but it's definitely in the top 3, so I'm just putting it at 3 for now, because it's just too recent to really know how I feel about it yet. But man, this movie is so good. I described it briefly as saying, imagine if Michel Gondry directed the film 8½. And I have no better way of describing it than that. It is one of the most self-indulgent, narcissistic, pretentious films a filmmaker can make, and it's also just one of the best movies I've ever seen in my entire life. It's got some of the absolute craziest and best imagery I've ever seen in any movie ever. It's so astounding with the cinematography and the camera work and the designs of the sets and and the CGI that went into it, and the acting, and everything about this movie came together to tell one of the most bizarre, absolutely strange and outlandish stories I've ever seen put to film, and I loved every second of it. I knew 5 minutes in, this movie is going on my list, and somewhere near the top. I knew immediately starting this movie. And so if you're a weirdo like me, and you like weird movies like I do, you'll absolutely love this movie too. Number 2, The Whale. This movie is hard to talk about, and I don't still feel like I can give it an accurate rating, because yeah, there's flaws in there, and there's some things that you can nitpick about it, but there's just something about the authenticity that Brendan Fraser brought to this performance, where every time you saw his face, every time he delivered a line, every time you saw him move with that costume on, it just brought me to tears. And so much of how this movie just handles the topics of depression and loss and obesity and all of these things just hit home in such authentic, powerful ways that I didn't, until this moment, really know was possible in film. So yeah, it is hard to feel like you can accurately rate it when you're watching it and you see some things that are worth nitpicking in the filming technique and the editing and the acting and all of that stuff, and then see one of the greatest performances of my lifetime just out of left field, Brendan Fraser becoming one of the best actors I've ever seen right there for this performance. And I've always been a big fan of him, but I had no idea he had this in him. It was absolutely breathtaking. This movie is one gut punch after another, and I'm so glad I got to see it. It's just one of those movies you're like, I'm glad this came out during my lifetime. I am. It really is a tough watch at times. It's hard to get through some of the scenes in this movie, but it is so powerful, so poignant, so raw and emotional and authentic and honest. That's the buzzword of this movie, is honest, and it holds true. This movie is absolutely worth your time. Definitely check it out if you haven't. And the number 1 movie of the year 2022 is Everything Everywhere All at Once. Yeah, this movie's kind of just been locked into the number 1 slot here for almost the entire year, and I kept waiting for movies to dethrone it. I thought that The Whale might, I thought Bardo might, but I couldn't move it. No matter how many great movies I saw this year, and I enjoyed a lot of movies this year, nothing budged this movie from the top spot. It is so imaginative, it's so energetic, it's so powerful and emotional as well. Every great thing that I said about Bardo applies to this movie as well. Every great thing I said about The Whale also applies to this movie, where it's raw, emotional powerhouse of a movie, and outstanding, outlandish, bizarre imagery, and then you take that and you add the brilliance of the comedy of the funniest movies of the year too, like Bodies, Bodies, Bodies. You just take every great thing about all of the great movies I saw this year, you smush it in one movie, and that's Everything Everywhere All at Once. It was such an outstanding experience. It is so rare anymore for me to go into a movie with no expectations and come out going, that was one of the best movies I've ever seen in my life, and immediately in my personal top 10 movies of all time. Bardo, I watched that movie and went, that was life-changing, that movie's amazing. It's in my top 100 movies of all time, but I don't think I'd put it in my top 10. Same thing with The Whale, same thing with a couple of other movies on this list where I'm those were really good, I enjoyed them a lot, and I'll buy them on DVD, I'll put them on my shelf, and I'll brag about them and show them to people and all that stuff, but nothing came close to the personal impact that Everything Everywhere All at Once had, where I was all right, I saw it by myself, so I immediately went and grabbed people and said, we need to go see this in theaters, I need to see it again. I already bought it on DVD, I've already watched it a couple more times, I love thinking about the movie. Like I said, it's already in my top 10 movies, favorite movies of all time. This movie, where did it come from? It was such an amazing experience. I loved everything about this movie. It was hilarious. It was poignant. It was just emotionally gut-wrenching and powerful and tugged the tears straight out of my eyes while watching, freaking raccoons making spaghetti and rocks with googly eyes and a donut, or no, not an everything bagel, and you know, like hot dogs for hands. It's like, how does a movie with hot dogs for hands make you cry as much as this movie made me cry? This movie, yeah, I can't say enough good things about it, and I don't want to keep talking forever because I already did a first thoughts. I've already talked about this movie, but yes, this movie was absolutely light years away my favorite movie of 2022. You can argue semantics. Is it objectively the best movie of the year or not? Like I said, is The Whale better? Is Bardo better? You could argue about that till you're blue in the face. I don't care. Maybe they are. But to me, my favorite movie was definitely Everything, Everywhere, All at Once. I love that freaking movie. So that's what I had to think. What did you guys think? What are your favorite movies of this year? How would you rank them? Have you seen all the movies on my list? And which ones do you want to see that you haven't yet? And yada, yada, yada. There's a million questions you can ask. So please just interact with me. I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts on all of these movies and more. Thanks for watching, guys. Bye.